Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you all are doing well on this Monday. BYU, the 6th seed, going into the NCAA tournament, facing off against the 11th seed VCU Rams. Some familiarity for these two programs. If you've been paying attention, Ryan Odom, the head coach of the VCU Rams, was a head coach at Utah State, faced BYU twice, and owns a career record as a head coach, speaking of Odom, of 0-2 against the Cougars. They obviously played in the 2020, 2021, and 21-22 seasons between the Aggies and the Cougars. Max Shulga, their leading guard, speaking of VCU, was a player at Utah State as well. Played very sparingly. I think it was only like 4 minutes, I think, across the two matchups that BYU and Utah State played when Ryan Odom was coaching them, but he has blossomed into the A10 player of the year this year. So a lot going for VCU, but the national media, man, they absolutely love the BYU Cougars. We have seen guys like Seth Davis. He thinks that BYU has everything it needs to make a run here to the Elite Eight. The quote he used, if you like points, and I know you guys do, this is the region for you, speaking of the East region that BYU is playing in, I actually think BYU has enough to get to the Elite Eight. Some high praise from Seth Davis, Mr. Sharpie himself. Those of you who are on social media know exactly what I'm talking about, but he's not the only one. Rob Dauster from the Field68.com, who has actually been a champion of BYU for most of the season. I will give Rob his credit. He really believes that BYU has the pieces to make a run here. You also have guys out there like Andy Katz, who has BYU going to Newark, New Jersey to play against Duke in the Elite Eight. He says, I have Duke advancing, but he thinks that BYU can roll through and play in an Elite Eight format. This is awesome. This is high praise. And this is, I think, well-deserved honors from BYU, well-deserved honors for BYU. But should we be concerned that the national media believes so much in BYU, conversely, against the recent track record of one-and-dones in the NCAA tournament? That's the only concern I harbor here for this. We're also seeing some of the athletes out there, or those celebrity brackets out there. I saw Cooper DeJean of the Philadelphia Eagles, obviously a Super Bowl champion. He has BYU in the Elite Eight. A lot of people, I think that's the ceiling. If you were to run into Duke, speaking of BYU in the Elite Eight, going up against Cooper Flagg and company, I get that. But the biggest thing for me is, why do the national media believe in BYU? I think they point directly, at least in my mind, to the fact that BYU has a very experienced roster. I just talked about earlier about why I think Dallin Hall should be BYU's starting point guard here in March Madness. But you look at Richie Saunders. You look at guys like Fousseyni Traore, Trevin Nell, on down the list. There's a ton of experience residing on this BYU roster, and experience plays a major factor in the NCAA tournament. Other things that play a factor, shot making. This is a BYU team that is, at one point, I think they may very well still be this, was the number one team in the Big 12 in terms of getting to the bucket and shooting threes. It's a very NBA-esque offense that Kevin Young has implemented with BYU, but it's obviously worked to great effect outside of playing against the likes of Houston, which you look at this bracket, there's not really a Houston-like team on there outside of what I think is VCU, but even VCU is much less experienced in terms of the overall caliber of opponent than a Houston Cougars squad. So that's, I think, why BYU is this darling for a lot of people when they're filling out their brackets. They were going to be a trendy pick. We already knew that. The way that BYU plays is very aesthetically pleasing. It's a fun style of basketball. I'll admit, you guys know, if you're a longtime listener, that I frankly struggled to watch a lot of college basketball outside of BYU. I will watch Utah. I will watch Utah State, UVU, the other local programs, because my radio job entails watching those teams. But I'm telling you, I'm not watching Duke, North Carolina by and large, because simply put, I'd rather watch an NBA game. The stylistic differences between the NBA and college basketball are what pushed me towards watching the NBA, because it's more aesthetically pleasing. Higher shot making, better overall defense without having to grab everybody like Houston does or Iowa State does. But I think the style BYU plays has a lot of people enthralled with them. And that's why I think you're seeing this national media coverage saying, hey, watch out for the BYU Cougars. I sure hope they're right. They are talking heads who watch, like I said, a lot more college basketball than I do. I will always defer to the Seth Davises. I will always defer to Rob Dauster. I will always defer to guys like Andy Katz, because they do this for a living. They watch college basketball every single night. And the fact that they watch it and they believe this heavily in BYU, That's awesome. So let's take faith that these national pundits, they know what they're talking about. Because if they do, BYU will be that March Madness darling, and we could watch them advancing to the Elite Eight for just the second time in program history. Remember, 1981, and Gregory Bell put it out there. When BYU advanced in 1981 to the Elite Eight, came out of the East region, had to beat an A-10 team, had to face off against a potential Big Ten team in the second round. Everything seems to be lining up here for BYU to repeat what Danny Ainge did. Now, we'll be 44 years later. It'd be crazy to think that that could come to fruition, but I'd love it. I would love to cover it, obviously. I have an ill-timed vacation next week if it does come to fruition, but the vacation actually works out where I'll be able to still have plenty of coverage, but it's just, it's awesome to see BYU being the darling that they are. And let's hope and pray that they prove these national pundits right, these national talking heads, because Lord only knows that if BYU crashes out in the first round, that's going to have some people saying, well, now BYU, they're going to turn on BYU. And that's the tough part to stomach here. If this BYU team can't get it done, remember, last year there were so many people that thought the BYU could make a run under Mark Pope. They were a three-happy team, and when they were hitting, they were very capable of winning. When they weren't, obviously, they were very much vulnerable, and they lost to Duquesne. And this year, it feels like this team is much more well-rounded. I know that they're going to get the moniker that they're very three-heavy, live by the three, die by the three. It's not necessarily this BYU team. They have the capability of playing inside the arc if need be, but obviously, if they can hit from deep, they can hang with anybody. And you look at what happened against the likes of Iowa State in the NCAA tournament. They can shoot 18 of 36, 50% from beyond the three. But then the very next night, shoot 21%. Was it 6 of 28 or whatever they shot against Houston? You got to find a little more balance from the three-point line. And if they do that, they very well could prove the Dausters, just these national talking heads, these pundits, these analysts who absolutely think BYU has what it takes to make a run here. I hope they go prove them wrong, because that would just be an absolutely magical, fun time to watch this BYU Cougar squad do their thing. And we'll see if they're right, or if BYU makes a fool of themselves in front of the national audience once again. And that would be very tough to stomach, because if this team can't get it done, man, I'd be hard-pressed to think what it's going to take for BYU to get a run going in the NCAA tournament outside of having the National Player of the Year in Jimmer Fredette and Danny Ainge, who are the two who have driven BYU the deepest in the NCAA tournament in recent memory.